Well, ladies and gentlemen and students of Bentley University, fellow faculty members and staff and distinguished guests, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 14th Raytheon Lecture in Business Ethics. My name is Michael Hoffman, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Business Ethics at Bentley. For those of you who have been faithfully attending these lectures over the years, you have seen me introduce many impressive speakers in the most important sense. Today is no exception. We have the distinct pleasure and honor to have as our guest speaker someone who is one of the most celebrated business thinkers of our time, Dr. Rosabeth Moss Kanter of the Harvard Business School. In this case, however, what is an exception is that the person who will introduce Dr. Kanter will be none other than Bentley's own president, Ms. Gloria Larson. However, before I invite President Larson to the podium, I would like to acknowledge the company that has made today's lecture possible, the Raytheon Company. Raytheon, which has its headquarters here in Waltham, is one of the world's leading technology and defense companies. Raytheon has been a long-standing supporter of the Center for Business Ethics and one of our most valued partners. One reason for the strength of this partnership has been Raytheon's commitment to creating a strong ethical culture that pervades the company. I would particularly like to recognize one person who is with us today, Ms. Patty Ellis, Vice President of Business Ethics and Compliance at Raytheon. Patty is an executive fellow of the Center and dear friend, and someone we all hold in the highest regard. Patty, thank you. We are also fortunate to have with us today several other special guests who I want to thank for joining us. Notably, two members of Bentley's Board of Trustees, Mr. Ken Colburn and Mr. Fran Kingsley. We are delighted to see them and all of you who have joined us here today. Oh, and that reminds us, this was coming later in my introduction. Please turn off your cell phones and your internet connections, which I'm just about to do. So, in fact, that was the next sentence. Please note that to make this event a rich experience for you all, there will be a question and answer session immediately after the formal presentation. And following that, there will be a reception in the Adamian Dandies room, room 340, opposite from the Commons on the third floor of this building, to which you are all invited. There you can help yourself to some delicious food and various beverages, and also have a chance to meet Professor Kanter. As an extra special feature of today's event, through a special arrangement, we were able to give to approximately 200 people autographed hardcover copies of Professor Kanter's recently published and highly acclaimed book, SuperCorp, How Vanguard Companies Create Innovation, Profits, Growth, and Social Good. During the reception, we will also have copies available for $19 apiece. This is a book that belongs on the shelf of every serious business student, and that includes me. For those who might want to watch a video recording of today's lecture, we expect to have a copy available for viewing on campus soon. Please note also that Bentley is a proud partner in the PBS NPR Forum Network, which provides webcasts of selected public lectures from the nation's leading cultural and educational institutions. Many of the Center for Business Ethics lectures can be found there, but only after about 2 months. So take advantage of your presence here to experience firsthand the insights of Professor Kanter that she will be sharing with us today. I now have the honor of welcoming to the stage our esteemed president, Ms. Gloria Larson, who will introduce Professor Kanter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike Hoffman, and thank you to the Center for Business Ethics and, of course, to our friends at Raytheon. Introducing Rosabeth Moss Kanter to give the 14th Raytheon Lecture in Business Ethics gives me an opportunity to say some things I have long wanted to about a much-admired longtime colleague and friend. Of course, I am hardly alone in my admiration for Rosabeth. The fact that she has long held a highly distinguished professorship at Harvard Business School, and before that held tenured stints at Yale and Brandeis, and was a fellow at Harvard Law School, served as the first woman editor of the Harvard Business Review, helped found the global consulting firm Goodmeasure, has authored or co-authored 18 highly influential books, has been named to lists of the 50 most influential women in the world, and more recently, the 50 most influential business thinkers in the world, has received 23 honorary doctoral degrees and numerous awards, often advises CEOs of large and small companies, and regularly shares the speaker's platform with presidents, prime ministers, and CEOs at national and international events, including the World Economic Forum at Davos. All of these speak volumes about the high regard Professor Kanter is held in literally across the world. Her strategic and practical insights have helped generations of classrooms, corporations, and governments understand the various elements that define personal and organizational leadership and success, all with a very keen eye for fast-changing world dynamics. But those accolades and descriptives barely begin to describe the Rosabeth I know. She's brilliant, to be sure, but she's also warm, kind, and energetic, generous, and relentlessly idealistic. An idealism that's anchored by academic rigor and highly useful real-world tools for putting her research and theories into action. A world-renowned thought leader in change management, leadership, globalization, and the use of technology as a force for good, she sees the very best leaders as those who, quote, create coalitions, develop and use a support system, encourage, listen, and develop other people, all attributes that, quote, tend to transcend cultures, or as Rosabeth might say, are probably more Confucian than cowboy in today's New World Order. Recognized for her enormous talents and contributions some 20 years ago by Bentley College, we conferred an honorary degree of Doctor of Laws on Dr. Kanter, and she delivered the commencement address to the class of 1990. Here's just a very small portion of what we said about Rosabeth then. Your insights into the ways in which innovation, productivity, motivation, and individual career success are influenced by organizational structure and solid circumstances have provoked us to revise our views of organizational life and how companies should operate. You've made important contributions to our understanding of management and organization in contemporary life. 20 years later, Rosabeth's insights and contributions have grown exponentially, as had her influence across the globe. Clearly, we are living in extraordinarily difficult times, uncertain times, in terms of domestic and global economic realities, geopolitics, military conflicts and threats of terrorism, natural disasters, and more. Recent corporate failures and ethical failings have resulted in worldwide financial losses, as well as a pervasive loss of trust in the integrity of leadership in many types of organizations. What should organizational leaders be doing to restore confidence, to offer new solutions to some of our biggest challenges? What types of business models do we need to better link financial success to the broader social good? All of which leads us to today's discussion centered around Dr. Kanter's latest book, SuperCorp. She says that true vanguard companies and their leaders are interested in more than charity. They're equally serious about making their companies both successful and sustainable. Dr. Kanter writes in SuperCorp that, quote, this is a mindset as well as a business model, and it's possible for individuals as well as companies to adopt it. Humanistic values and attention to societal needs are a starting point for smart strategy in the global information age. With optimism for what could lie ahead, Dr. Kanter continues to think about leadership in consistently refreshing ways, and we're enormously fortunate to have her with us today. Please help me welcome Dr. Rosabeth Moss Kanter, my friend, to the stage.
Thank you, Gloria. Oh, my. Thank you, Gloria. First of all, thank you, Bentley Center for Business Ethics. Thank you, Raytheon, and especially thank you, Gloria Larson. I'd like to meet the person you just introduced. Gloria and I have known each other a long time, and at the moment, I think we serve on 3 different boards together, as well as being members of many organizations together. And I should just say, I mean, I realize it's taking a long time to get into the substance, but I do a regular weekly blog on Harvard Business. It's now called hbr.org. And I did one when I was feeling that I needed a lift on what I called energizers, which is, I think, the true issue in leadership is how do you get people motivated and energized? And Gloria, you are one of my energizers. You know, there are certain people that if you email them in the middle of the night, you might find that you're both in Dubai at the same time, and it's a real lift. So I'm honored to be here today. I had forgotten it was 20 years ago that I was last speaking at Bentley, except for your inauguration. And these are difficult and troubled times. And the financial crisis has largely been brought about by banks. And so I thought I would start today by doing something a little counterintuitive and talking about banks and some really good banks that I had encountered in my research that I write about in SuperCorp and what they did, because I thought if we can find good examples from banks, then we know it's something that everybody should be doing. So let me start by taking us far away around the globe to Korea. And I want to talk about a bank, a merger. And this was a very interesting story because it was also a story about change in the country. And it's a story about how humanistic values and management made something very, very successful. The bank that I'm going to talk about is now a group called Shinhan Financial Group. And Shinhan, the origin, the bank, had started about 1982 as a small entrepreneurial bank serving society in a different way than had been the norm in that country at the time, when it was big banks, cozy with government, cozy with the big industrial conglomerates, in a form of capitalism now known as crony capitalism, where people are doing favors for one another and there's a lot of inside dealing, and it's all the big guys kind of in collusion with each other. But Shinhan was different. It was entrepreneurial. It was going to build the country into, this is South Korea now, it was going to build the country into a developed country by focusing on small and mid-sized enterprises, the middle market, and staying away from that kind of crony capitalism. So Shinhan grew quickly because there was a need. Often businesses that grow are serving a societal need anyway. I mean, there wouldn't be any business if somebody didn't need whatever products and services are being offered. So Shinhan grew quickly. And in the late 90s, about a little over 10 years ago, there was a big financial crisis all over Asia. And one of the largest banks in South Korea that had been part of the crony capitalism, one of the largest banks had to be bailed out by the government. Sound familiar? So there's precedent. So it was bailed out by the government. It's called Chohung Bank. Chohung was 105 years old. Its people had sort of pride that there they were, working closely with all the big conglomerates in South Korea, except that they had failed. Shinhan made an offer to buy Cho-hung from the government. The union, now in Korea, unions extend well into management. The union didn't like the idea that this upstart entrepreneurial bank was going to buy the proud old bank. And so, in protest, when the government announced that it was going to sell Cho-hung to Shinhan, in protest, and just imagine this scene, 3,500 men at Cho-hung Bank shaved their heads and piled up the hair in front of Shinhan headquarters in downtown Seoul, Korea. Now there is a labor action. That is a protest. My only hope when I was teaching this to my MBA students, right around the time I also had a Gillette case, was that they had used Gillette razors. Other than that, you know, that was sort of local pride here in Massachusetts. So that was a protest. So Shinhan, the people at Shinhan, the top executives are saying, well, what do? Do we walk away from this? Or does it still make sense? In order to carry this forward, the leaders of Shinhan had to sign a standstill agreement with the union where they agreed not to integrate these companies for 3 years. They had to agree to equal representation on everything and not to integrate for 3 years. So what's a good company to do? What they did was they went ahead with it, and because the Shinhan spirit of we are here to produce social good in a humanistic way with attention to people, they went ahead and without doing any formal integration, they built a community out of these two banks. And they did what they called emotional integration. And that was the word used by the young managers, and it was all new young people at Shinhan who came up with this way of merging the banks. They said, we are going to emotionally integrate, even if we can't formally put the banks together. And they did things like take 1,500 of the top people off to climb a mountain, the biggest shrine in Korea. They invested in the people and this event. In fact, I was there, and I was speaking about change management to the group, and I can tell you, as I looked out in the audience, I saw, there was 1,500 people, I saw about 1,495 men and 5 women, although they assured me there were at least 50 there, so I felt better. I mean, so there are things that were not yet perfect at Shinhan, but by focusing on the people and the culture, what happened was, within a year, the two banks were starting to work together on task forces. They were starting to share a culture. They were starting to develop values together. They were starting to create the future. And within a year, the union was neutralized. They had no more sway over this. Nobody was going to protest. Within a year and a half, financial performance was strong. And they won back the customers they had lost, who were a little freaked out by the pile of hair in front of the headquarters. By 3 years, the time at which they now could supposedly formally integrate, they had already self-integrated because they shared a culture and because of the values of these banks. And 5 years later, not only did Shinhan Financial Group outperform other banks in Korea, they outperformed the entire Korean stock market. So the investment in values and culture and humanistic management paid off, even in a culture that itself has a lot of militancy. The Korean translation of my book, Confidence, which in every other language is all about optimism and looking into the future, the Korean edition pictures a clenched fist. I mean, that's the militancy of the culture. That's what confidence meant. And yet, a path-breaking bank with humanistic values could overcome difficulties, protests, outperform its industry and the market. Well, let me switch geographies for a moment and go to Latin America and tell you about another bank. Because the CEO of that bank, to me, is the CEO of the future. If I had to name one, and I know the CEOs of many of the greatest companies in the world. I was on the platform in Davos. You can find this if you follow my tweets on Twitter. You can also find it on YouTube. I was on the stage with Eric Schmidt of Google, Indra Nooyi of PepsiCo, and so forth. But this CEO, his name is Fabio Barbosa, I think is the prototype for the leader of the future. Fabio Barbosa, about 10 years ago, about the same time that Shinhan was buying Shohung. I want you to think about this timing, because I'm talking about a 21st century phenomenon. I know the Center for Business Ethics at Bentley has been in operation for a long time. I know we've been talking about values for a long time, but it's really in the last 10 years that this has taken hold and been manifested in companies in every part of the world, not just what we had called previously the developed countries. So, Fabio Barbosa is the recipient of what I came to call the Nobel Prize. I mean, we all remember that on October 9th of this year, of last year, President Obama, it was announced that President Obama was going to receive the Nobel Prize. You know, albeit with a little controversy associated with it, but that was the announcement. But 2 days before, Fabio Barbosa received what I call the Nobel Prize. The prize for having a sense of purpose and values at the heart of the enterprise. And that prize that he won was his bank in Brazil went public. They floated 14%. They started to float. They ended up floating 18% of the shares of what is now Grupo Santander, Brazil. It got floated on the São Paulo and New York stock exchanges in the world's largest IPO for the previous 18 months. The largest IPO coming out of the recession. And I didn't say Brazil's largest, the world's largest. They won an $8 billion capital infusion for being noble, for doing the right thing. So let me go back and tell you what they did. So Fabio Barbosa, like around the time Shinhan and Shohung, late 90s, around 10, a little more than 10 years ago, Fabio Barbosa was the Brazilian head of an international bank, and they bought a large Brazilian retail bank called Banco Real, and that became the successor name for a while. And as they were asking themselves, again, this question of how do we integrate? How do we bring cultures together? What do we do to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace, while at the same time motivating employees and building a strong culture? And Fabio Barbosa and his top executives examined the conditions in the country and said Brazil has big needs, but Brazil is developing, it's going to grow. And they examined their own values, who they wanted to be as people, what they wanted to bring to their organizations, and they decided that the strategy of Banco Real, the business strategy, would be built around serving society, social and environmental responsibility. That was their business strategy. That was their trigger for innovation, for example. That was their way of saying, what needs are there out in society that banking services, financial services, could help provide for? So Brazil, environmental issues were big in Brazil back then, even before green issues became mainstream in the United States, I mean, there were issues about the rainforest, there were issues of pollution and growth, and so they created lending products that would help people retrofit their houses or their cars to make them more energy efficient. They created screens for their customers to see whether their customers were meeting social and environmental standards. Now, wait a minute. When we think about good business practice, do we say the first thing is you're going to tell your customers, I'm sorry, we're not going to let you be our customers because our standards are so high. You're going to walk away from customers? Well, they decided to take the risk that they'd walk away from some customers because they called it, and when I say it's good to learn from these banks, because our banks didn't get it in the US, they said, that's good risk management. Values are really good risk management, because if we were going to lend to a project that's about to cut down the rainforest, or it's going to displace farmers, or it's going to have some other hidden consequence, well, we're not necessarily going to get our money back. And so by holding high social and environmental standards, they not only created innovations in products, they began to work with customers in a different way. And yes, they did walk away from customers in certain industries, armaments, for example, where the values of the bank said we don't want those customers particularly. But they found that for where there was a risk of losing a customer, in fact, they created confidence in the staff so that the staff could serve to educate customers about how they could meet these higher standards. And that turned out to be a really valuable business proposition because the customers knew too that regulation was coming, that they'd have to make changes eventually, and now they could work with a bank that would help them with compliance. So they began to innovate, they began to work with customers differently. Now, when Fabio and his executives started today's Banco Real, it was a back-of-the-pack bank. Middle range, lots of branches, but not the biggest, not the most admired, and not the most profitable. Over time, through all of these ways of operating, plus the culture that they were creating for employees, and by the way, Banco Real went from sort of unknown to becoming one of the most desirable places for the best graduates to go to work. So they began to have a talent advantage too. And through these years, gradually the bank quickly became among the most admired in Brazil, grew in size, became the largest, and when there was a little shuffling of foreign ownership, and Santander of Spain acquired Banco Real to put it together with the Santander branches in Brazil, the bank that survived was Banco Real. The CEO who survived that merger was Fabio Barbosa, who found himself suddenly with twice the number of staff because Santander wanted the culture and was willing to invest in it. And on October 7th, 2009, it was announced that 18% of the shares had been bought in the largest IPO in 18 months. I call that the Nobel Prize. Here's a bank doing it right by values, social and environmental responsibility as a business strategy, not an add-on, and they got the Nobel Prize. So those examples from banks say that even in industries that have gotten us in trouble, these strategies work and are good business. And there are four key elements to what I call the 21st century vanguard company that's ahead of the pack, that manages humanistically through values, uses its clout for social good, but accumulates growth and innovation and growth because it starts with a basis of values. 4 key principles. One is, first of all, just to start with a very strong sense of purpose. And it is true. This is something that we're seeing startups increasingly want to model. But a strong sense of purpose at the heart of the enterprise, and a purpose that involves serving the greater good, serving society, as Banco Real had it, as Shinhan had it, as Online in Japan had it, as IBM has it, as Procter & Gamble has it. Procter & Gamble is now over 170, it's about nearly 180 years old. Procter & Gamble had always had a strong culture and sense of purpose, but again, it's in recent years that has been revived as a driving force for the enterprise, not just a nice to have because we have a strong culture, but as something increasingly articulated and central to business strategy. So it was in the 21st century when A.G. Lafley became CEO of Procter & Gamble. He had to run a little turnaround, partly that Asian financial crisis that I mentioned that happened in the 90s, hurt a lot of big US multinationals too that had been counting on growth in Asia. So they needed a mini turnaround. A.G. Lafley came in, and by the way, on the first day, when his appointment was announced, the stock price immediately dropped. So he felt he had a lot to live up to. Well, he's now going to go down in history as one of the greatest CEOs. He grew Procter & Gamble's sense of purpose again. He began to manage through what they call the PVP, purpose, values, and principles. Statement, just words, but for Procter & Gamble, it became a living rationale for making business decisions, the PVP. So around that time, I mean, my research team and I spent about over 3 years traveling the world, interviewing, working with companies, and so forth. And in Brazil, again, to go to Brazil, we discovered that Brazil, which is one of the biggest growth markets of the world, that Procter & Gamble was failing in Brazil. Right before A.G. Lafley came in and reinvigorated the sense of the PVP at Procter & Gamble, it was failing. And in fact, Lafley's predecessor had said to the people in Brazil that P&G, if they didn't prove that they had a viable business, P&G might reduce its investment in Brazil. I mean, imagine that, growth market of the world, and what's now the world's largest consumer products company not able to do business there. Well, they were losing out to Unilever, they were losing out to domestic competition. Why? In part because they had a global strategy that said they only make premium priced products at the high end, and that wasn't exactly going to fly in Brazil, which was a developing market where the largest segment was lower income people. So we have a corporate theory, but now we have a set of values and principles and a challenge to the people in Brazil. Well, the people in Brazil did not want to see the business fail. First of all, they cared about their country. They believed in the products. They felt the products could make a difference for people. The PVP, statement of purpose, starts with the purpose of Procter & Gamble is to improve the lives of the world's consumers now and for generations to come. And people believed that their products could improve lives. They believed in the company because they had often joined the company because of that sense of values. In fact, that, like many other values-driven companies, has to be a matter of fit. It's not just a job. People are taking this on because they feel it's a commitment they can make, given their own values. So, the people in Brazil went to work, and they started innovating again. Like Banco Real, they started innovating. They found ways to bring more value into the products at lower prices. They created lines of products in things like feminine hygiene, diapers and laundry detergent, those everyday things that actually do make it possible for families to go to work. They innovated and created lines of products that were known as básico. In Portuguese, it turns out básico doesn't mean basic, it means essential. So they wanted to keep all the value, but sell to lower income people. So this was incredibly successful. It saved the business in Brazil and became a model for the world. In fact, Procter & Gamble has launched some products in the US, Tide Basic, modeled on what was happening in Brazil. All right, so we're interviewing people, and I say to the people who were parts of these teams, often, very energetic, younger managers in the company who were so excited by what they had done. I said, how did you do it? They said, we just looked at the PVP and it told us what to do. Now wait a minute, I just recited to you Procter & Gamble's statement of purpose, right? Improve the lives of the world's consumers now and for generations to come. That doesn't tell you what to do, specifically that you needed these products, that you had to reduce the price. So I said, how did the PVP tell you? They said, well, if our mission is to improve lives, and there's a whole set of people out there who can't afford our products, we're clearly not improving our lives, it told us what to do. Now, what's important about this is not whether it told anybody to do anything, except that people believed in it. It became their cause because they knew that their company wasn't just interested in the bottom line, but how you got there, and who was being helped, and who the consumer is. All right, so then it turns out, of course, I said that this was not part of the global strategy. So I said to them, well, how did you get approval for something where the brand guardians in Cincinnati would say, this is not how we put products out to market? So, and as you know, at this time still, and still in big companies, people talk about the headquarters city as though it was a person. They talk about Cincinnati tells us. I keep saying, who's Cincinnati? Tell me the function. So how did they manage to do that? To have the discussion about a controversial business strategy. We can now say, well, it was very successful, and it's now the heart of what P&G is going to do. But, so I said, how did you manage to get approval to do this? And they would say, really easy. They said, we just used the PVP. And again, I would say, well, the words in the PVP don't tell you that this is the answer. But in fact, having this sense of purpose makes those controversial business decisions move above politics or territory. I'm the brand manager in Cincinnati, so I should determine what to do, versus, well, we're the people in Brazil, we know our local market. When you have a noble purpose, when you have a culture that transcends the interests of the individual, it's much easier to have the conversation about things that might be controversial and sometimes make business decisions that are not always directed just by the numbers. Now, of course, P&G is a very fact-based company. You do need the numbers. The people in Brazil had to bring evidence that there was a market. They had to bring evidence that they could innovate fast enough. They did that by creating unique partnerships with distributors, unique partnerships with the manufacturing organization to get costs out of the manufacturing process. So they acted on their values in terms of a collaborative mode, but they had something to bring to Cincinnati under this umbrella of purpose. The sense of purpose animates the growth of the best companies, and in fact, P&G did have a big strategic trade-off at one point. I talk about it in SuperCorp, but it became a fairly well-known example because P&G got awards for this, but that's not where they started. P&G at one point, improved the lives of the world's consumers, decided that water is a very big issue. And water is important to households. water and the quality of water makes a difference in the health of people. In fact, we could probably eliminate many childhood diseases and improve the health of the world simply by clean drinking water everywhere. So P&G said, aha, perfect place for a consumer product that on a daily basis people could use like they use toothpaste, we hope. And so they had done a lot of new things, again, for P&G in their open innovation model, which is another 21st century SuperCorp mode. P&G partnered with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and other researchers to learn about water and disease, and finally had, through an acquisition, a product called Pure. Pure is a water purification powder that could be sold in small sachets. You pour it into glass. If we scooped up the Charles River bottom right now and put it in a glass, pour it in a little Pure, in 20 minutes, you'd have clean drinking water. I should do that here and challenge you to be the first one.
Yes.
Right. Well, it might taste a little chlorinated because, you know, there are some chemicals that are making the water, that are cleaning up the water. But in fact, it worked. It was miraculous. People around the world where they were trying to sell this in places that needed water sanitation often loved, in fact, loved it so much that they would hoard it for special occasions. Like only your guests, you know, deserve clean water. Well, you know, suddenly, I mean, many of the things we want to do through business that do good in the world have a lot of barriers. So one of the barriers was, you know, what's people's theory about water and disease? You know, that's something that's not intuitive necessarily. Secondly, this was very affordable, even by poor people, but they didn't really know what difference it would make, and they didn't necessarily have the daily habits that it takes to use all of the other kinds of products that a Procter & Gamble would have. And so even though this was a miraculous thing, they weren't selling it. The market wasn't there yet. They found that in places, by the way, where kids were educated in schools about this connection, they sold more of it. I believe, by the way, we get to the 5th graders, then we have markets. Because the kids are the ones teaching the parents, especially in the growth markets in the developing world. All right, so they weren't selling it. Now, what's a good company to do? What's a company to do whose statement of purpose says improve the lives of the world's consumers now and for generations to come? So there were many debates at P&G, at corporate, about what to do about this. And you know, there's lots of other business units saying, get rid of it, it's costing money. My business also improves lives, we need the resources. What's a good company to do? Well, Pure had champions. And luckily, those champions included A.G. Lafley, the CEO, Bob McDonald, who's now the CEO, and they decided that they would not be true to their purpose if they let it go. And that there are other mechanisms a company can use to keep products on the market and to learn about developing similar products. And so they set up a not-for-profit in collaboration, in partnership with United Nations agencies and global NGOs. They set up a partnership called a nonprofit called Children's Safe Drinking Water. You can find it on the web. Children's Safe Drinking Water was the first winner of the American Express Members Project for the best social innovation of the year. I was actually on the advisory board for that project, and I was a little uncomfortable that something associated with a for-profit company was going to be getting the prize for social good. And then I said, wait a minute, you know, I'm writing this book. No, I said, that's the way it should be. These lines between for-profit, not-for-profit, they start blurring when companies operate through a sense of purpose. And P&G didn't do that for the prize. They did it to be true to their values. Bob McDonald succeeded A.G. Lafley as CEO in July. In August of this year, he announced, this is all post the when SuperCorp had to go to bed, you know, it was already in press. In August, he announced Procter & Gamble's new growth strategy. And Procter & Gamble, which bought Gillette, is now the world's largest consumer products company. Its growth strategy, the CEO says, is purpose-inspired growth. He said, we will improve more lives in more places more completely. So first of all, the more completely suggests bundling a number of products, finding the synergies between them, serving a household for a range of needs. Whatever, purpose-inspired growth is the business strategy. Now, there were some voices in P&G that when Bob and I appeared on a platform in South Boston when the book came out, and there had been some, he had an analyst conference call that day, there were some voices that said, you know, soft pedal that purpose stuff, but he didn't. He said, where are we going to find the growth? He said, there are 7 billion consumers in the world. He said they spend on average $14 a year on P&G products. If we could just find more ways to improve their lives in more places more completely, say $2 a year on average, that's a really big business. That's where our growth is going to come from. So this sense of purpose, and Bob is very serious about this. If you've seen him, he's now getting a lot of press, a lot of interviews, and I was actually proud to say the other day, I think it was the March 2nd issue of Fortune, he was interviewed, he was one of 9 CEOs interviewed on what other company do you most admire, and he said IBM because of what they did after the tsunami, which is the story with which I opened SuperCorp, and so I know where he got it. In fact, he says that's where he got it. But he's very serious about this strategy guiding the company. Indra Noory at PepsiCo is serious about PepsiCo, you know, sugar water, salty snacks, becoming a health company. That is a company that has a strong sense of purpose to make everything they do healthier and to contribute to the health of the people that they serve. Interesting. Has hired the first chief health officer for the company. So this is a trend and a wave of the future, this sense of purpose, and that's the first key element. The other 3 are going to be faster because I've already touched on them. The second element is innovation. Where do your, I know people have classes, I was warned, and so, you know, go forth and learn. So, where do we find new ideas for our businesses? Where do we find the businesses to start? We find them often at the fringes of society, often by looking outside. I call it thinking outside the building. You know, it's going, not just thinking outside the box. It's going beyond the markets we're already in. It's going beyond established ways of doing things. Innovation is always solving some new need, new problem, and those who prosper are the ones who do serve more needs in more places more completely. And so the engagement that these SuperCorps have with society is one way to trigger innovation. When IBM started its Reinventing Education projects, that was a contribution. They were giving pro bono services and technology development to K through 12 schools all over the world. But little did they know then that what they were going to get back was not just reputation or the satisfaction of helping education. They were going to get back new ideas, new technologies for the business. So for example, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, IBM had a partnership with the Philadelphia schools. And it was different. You know, this new form of engagement is different because when you're going to work with the community, You have to listen to the community rather than simply hand off to them what you already have. So in that partnership, IBM was developing, in collaboration with the schools, things that would solve their problems. And that triggered innovation. In Philadelphia, literacy was a big problem, teaching reading, like it is in many urban schools around the world, actually, rural too. Literacy. So IBM said, great, we've got voice recognition technology. We can put something together for the school, a program the kids can learn to read by reading out loud, being corrected, etc. It turned out there was one big problem with that. In the established markets, the voice recognition technology that IBM had at that time could only recognize adult male voices with accents like the American Midwest, which is like a CNN announcer from the US. So it could not recognize children's high-pitched voices or changing voices. It could not recognize the 150 different accents you might have in a public school because of the not just countries that immigrants come from, but the various languages and dialects spoken at home. And so in order to fulfill its end of the partnership with the schools, IBM had to stretch to develop new technology. And that new technology, the voice recognition technology they developed to give it to the Philadelphia Public Schools, turned out to have large numbers of commercial applications. So engagement with society was a trigger for innovation. And in fact, now it is teaching reading to people, to adult males all over the world via a web-based program called Reading Companion. So innovation is the second key factor. So when I say, you do good and do well and all of that together, it's because you're getting ideas by stretching to solve problems no one has yet been able to crack. The third element is these partnerships, which I've talked about. Procter & Gamble with NGOs, IBM with the schools, but also partnerships throughout the supply chain. That's really important. The collaborative spirit with which a SuperCorp treats its supply chain. In SuperCorp, I talk about a cement company out of Mexico. Now, I don't know if any of you are fans of cement companies, and that's an industry you follow. It seems kind of low-tech, I think, these days, except that the chairman of Cemex, headquartered in Mexico, has been on the IBM board for years, and they are the most techie-oriented cement company. Cement is a commodity, and yet they've managed to do branded cement. They innovate in cement, antibacterial cement. Good for hospitals, good for homes. I mean, Cemex is an amazing company. Well, Cemex got this supply chain issue. Cemex wanted to grow its markets in places where Home Depot and Lowe's were going to enter. So Cemex said, we better capture some part of the hearts and minds of the market out there, or we're going to be overwhelmed at the retail end and with contractors by Home Depot and Lowe's. So what they did was in Mexico, and then they spread it throughout Latin America, they created a brand for small hardware stores to join a network. They gave the small hardware stores computers and training, increased their competence. Now they've got a brand, they've got capabilities, and they engaged them in community service. Cemex people worked with the small hardware store people to go out and build schools or do good things for the community. And that was their defense against Home Depot and Lowe's. And that was a way that they created jobs in small areas, increased the competence of their suppliers. It was all through partner orientation. And the same attention to humanistic values about how we can work together, even if we don't formally own each other, that helped Shinhan Bank create a climate where Shinhan and Chohung self-integrated, that is, formed a community before they were officially integrated. And those are the first three principles: purpose, innovation, partnership. The fourth is the people. And I know you were asked to turn off cell phones and laptops, etc. But, you know, I'm a big, all right, maybe for an event like this, although if you feel like tweeting, go ahead. But I'm a big believer that the new networking technologies, which empower people to contribute, to engage, to find each other in networks, are a powerful force that the SuperCorp is tapping. When Sam Palmisano became chief executive of IBM in 2002, IBM is about to celebrate its 100th anniversary next year. But he said, you know, IBM values were laid down a while ago. Time to refresh IBM values. So instead of sitting up there in Armonk, in his big office, writing out what the IBM values should be, like Thomas Watson Jr. had done in a different era, he said these days we should use technology to engage everybody. And so he created what was then the world's largest web chat, and certainly the only corporate conversation about values. They had close to 400,000 people eligible to go on the web for a 3-day values jam and talk about how are the IBM values working and what should they be for the 21st century. 140,000 people actually did it. And when Sam stood up at his board meeting to tell the board he was going to do this, he got interesting reactions. There was one very 20th century retired CEO who said, "But Sam, isn't that socialism?" Which we all know is not a good word to use in the United States. It may be in some other countries. And Sam Palmisano said, no, it's the way we have to do things these days. Because values are not something that can be imposed from the center. They have to come from the people. Our people are educated. You know, graduates like you are now or are about to be. Our people are educated. They're sophisticated. They're cynical. They're not going to believe anything unless they've engaged in it. And then IBM, by the way, had to innovate because if you all know how often Twitter does crash, I mean, that they had to have technology robust enough to hold this jam. And by the way, they're now selling jamming technology to other companies. And they've done this several times. They've now done it to set IBM's innovation priorities. They just did one on the environment. So using the new tools to engage people, and it was the people at Shinhan that reached out to Cho Hung and formed the teams and formed the networks and formed the social ties. It was the people at Banco Real that helped them win the Nobel Prize. Fabio Barbosa said to me, he said, I know that we're succeeding in this new culture because I've lost control of it. Because the ideas are no longer coming just from the top, they are coming from the people. And we know what people want. Every study shows that the newer generations, the younger generations, and it's not as though the older generations didn't want it either, they just didn't think they could get it. But people want self-expression. They want to weigh in on decisions, and more than anything else, they want their values to be expressed in their work. So that's all a SuperCorp is doing. You know, it is flying to the rescue after the tsunami, the story with which I opened the book. But a SuperCorp gets its power, gets its superpowers, its larger-than-life ability to do things from the people, from engaging the hearts and minds of the people because of the sense of purpose, because there's an opportunity to innovate, because of a collaborative partnership orientation, and most of all, because of humanistic values which say that a business, when you really come down to it, is not the financial structure, it's the people. And if you get the people right, if you get that part of it right, the financial success will follow. Thank you very much.
We'll now take some Q&A. And if you would, excuse me, if you would withhold your question until we get a microphone to you, that way we can get your question on the video or on at least recorded so we can put it into the monograph. So hang on until we get there. Who's first? Yes. And could you state your name and if you're a student or if you're a visitor?
Oh yes, Shaitan Tyler. I am a student right now, a grad student. I'm about to graduate actually right now in May. It would be really nice. You seem very busy and you're around the world and everything that you do. My really question is, are you happy with what you do?
Oh, yeah, well, wow. You have a great future. Am I happy with what I do? You know, I'm energized by the ability, I say energy, I said Gloria is an energizer. I'm energized by being able to work with people who share a certain idea that we can improve the state of the world. I have a project at Harvard I haven't even talked about, which is an attempt to innovate in higher education, improve the state of the world on a daily basis. You know, I think we all have, work is not always joyous on a daily basis. That's why it's called work. And, you know, there's a lot of drudgery and a lot of things you go through, but if you lift your head up from time to time and say, this is contributing to something that could make a difference, that keeps you going. I mean, I'm happy because of my family. You know, that's, for all of us, a great source of comfort and joy. Some of them are here right now. But I would say the happy, I mean, I do feel that happy is not, you know, we're trying to measure national happiness across countries. It's sort of hard to do. But it's very fulfilling to have a sense of mission and great people to work on with it. And it's nice to be able to pause from time to time, like coming here, to say, hey, you know, these really are ideas that can make a difference. And that keeps you going.
Thank you.
And maybe playing sports too. So you're a basketball player, yeah.
That's
good
football,
too.
I'm representing
yeah,
the sport.
okay. Yeah, I mean, you need the physical energy and stamina. But thank you. What a question. Yeah.
Question?
And I actually do like airplanes, you know.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about, first of all, my name is Tony Bune, I'm on the faculty here, and I must say I have long admired your work and used quite a bit of it in the classes that I teach. I was wondering a little bit about the sustainability of this model. And using this lecture series as an example, looking back, we had Ray Gilmartin here a number of years ago, and Merck and the wonderful things they did with river blindness. We had Ralph Larson of Johnson & Johnson, and you know, both companies I've long admired, which have since had some problems and slipped. How does that, you know, when you have companies that have purpose, that have values, that stand for these things, how do they lose that, and how can that be sustained?
So thank you. It's a very good question because I've written a little bit about Toyota. Toyota was a company I might have wanted to include in this and now feel that I'm lucky. So there are great companies. I mean, Ray Gilmartin is a colleague of mine at Harvard Business School now, and I have great admiration for Ray and feel it was kind of unfair. But you're never, a company cannot be defined simply by its philanthropic endeavors. That's a really nice to have, but if they're not watching the heart of the business to make sure that the core products and services are being delivered in with the highest possible standards, then they're not going to be great. That's why this book is not about CSR, corporate social responsibility. In fact, one of the reviewers said, gee, she seems to make the case for CSR without ever mentioning the word. Well, I mentioned a little. But it's not about the things you do because you're generous after the fact if you lose sight of how you're running the business itself. So here's to, and I had done an earlier analysis in my book, Confidence, about winning streaks and losing streaks and turnarounds. Why winning streaks end? They end because people in the company start taking for granted certain fundamentals and lose sight of them and let them go. So Toyota started operating in a world that was a little unfamiliar. It wasn't the core. Electronics is a little different. But somehow lost sight of one of the things that had made them great. Plan, do, check, act, quality control, and so forth. So the answer is the sustainability only comes from leadership. You're only as good as leaders are at continuing to engage people, continuing to reinforce the values, and not living on history. Like Johnson & Johnson became famous because they pulled Tylenol off the market. But how many years do you dine off that before you keep, looking at the new issues and making sure you're doing well? So that's the problem. I mean, no business success is sustainable by itself. I mean, it looked like Apple had run away with everything. With the iPhone, we'll see. You're constantly needing to innovate in the products or you slip. You similarly always need to invest in the culture and continue to grow leaders who will do that, and don't become so enamored of our success that we don't have to pay attention to that anymore because we're better than everybody else. That's how you're sustainable, is by leadership. Great question, by the way.
It's this side's turn. Question over here.
I'm Iris Berger. I'm also a faculty member here and also a long-term fan of yours.
Thank you.
You talk a lot about innovation in terms of the products and services for the market, but a big piece of innovation is also what happens within the organization. And so do the same principles hold, and how do they carry out to get companies internally innovating?
Sure. Well, I tend to feel that a culture of innovation extends across realms and domains. I was using examples that would resonate about how you can actually improve society through doing business, and the way you reach out is through products and services, but you also meet high standards, operate on your values by the way you operate inside the organization, the way you treat people. I would consider IBM's Values Jam, for example, a great example of organizational innovation. Suddenly opening a new mode for employee voice and supporting the idea of self-organizing networks, which is another thing, say, IBM does that's a source of their innovation. So it's an innovation that helps them get ideas that bubble up from the bottom. They innovate in HR practices. All of these companies, they're not necessarily, no one of the companies that I chose to write about, first of all, it wasn't my hit parade of what are the absolutely best companies, the only good companies. But the companies I chose to write about are differentially strong on various things. You can't say they're ahead on everything. But all the recent lists of who are the best in leadership development, who are the most admired, who have the strongest brands, IBM and Procter & Gamble are always in the top 5. Some of that's a little halo effect, but they are. They are innovating in a lot of things. I mean, organizational innovation, the way Procter & Gamble handled the Gillette merger. Not that there weren't issues. I mean, no one loves mergers. And the Gillette people did not shave their heads. But they operated in a different way. So I think organizationally, they are. Palmisano at IBM put forth an idea midway through the decade of the globally integrated enterprise, which was a true innovation for IBM to get away from the dominance of countries and the country general managers and territory and geography toward a way of working together on a global basis that would make it possible for people to form teams to serve client needs from wherever they came. One piece of the globally integrated enterprise became the global citizenship portfolio, which created, among other things, another organizational innovation at IBM, the Corporate Service Corps, as a leadership development tool. You could also say market entry, in which they now have 500 IBMers a year on a very selective basis that get a month of time in the field with training before and after to go solve the problem of some place where IBM might not even be in that market. And they learn to work on diverse teams. They learn to solve new problems. That's a leadership development, HR innovation tied to global citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say that the spirit of innovation pervades everything. I mean, it's opening people's minds to wider possibilities. That's all innovation is. So it's not just what's coming out of R&D. It's what's coming out of the engagement of people across borders and boundaries inside the company as well as outside. So yes, I think they're organizational innovators too.
You have time and strength for two more?
I have time. I mean, you tell me. I'm your guest,
okay.
You know.
Hi.
Next question. Yes, here's one in the center. Is Kyle? Right there.
I don't know. All right, you.
Is there an, oh, sorry. I'll get you next.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Cecile Whipple, and Professor Kanter, thank you for being here and giving us a very insightful lecture. I really appreciate it. I am a graduate student here in accounting. My question is, well, actually, I admire strong, independent, brilliant women who make a positive difference in this world.
You've got a president.
Yes, she is. She's one of them. My question is, how did you turn out like this? I want to learn.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I got some of the water down wrong. I'm all choked up. I'm choked up on the question, too. No, I mean, thank you. That's very flattering. I couldn't possibly answer that. I mean, you know, it's a little bit like the happiness question. I was a little puzzled because you just put your one foot in front of each other every day. And it's nice to dream big dreams and have a big goal, but you also have to have, you know, the daily to-do list and knock things off and just keep moving and not let the voices of negativity wear you down and, you know, be perverse enough to say, they say it can't happen, all right, let's prove it, but you got to do it with a support system. So I had, personally, I had a great husband, great son. My son said at one point he could never really get serious about dating a woman who didn't have an advanced degree. And he did marry one who had an advanced degree. You know, so you just do. You just believe that you can and keep going and accomplish things. And you know, I can't answer some of these questions because I am so aware of all the work still to be done, of all the things that need to be fixed, of all the daily things that have to happen. So you also can't, just like I said, companies should not get, you know, too caught up in remembering their history and congratulating themselves. It's like tennis. The biggest mistake I make in tennis, and I make many because I'm not that good, is stopping to admire a great shot that I just made. As you know, that is the kiss of death. You're going to miss the next one. You just have to keep focusing on each play, each next step, and keep executing, and then you may find that you've that it adds up to something, which is really a great thing when that happens. Thank you for asking that question.
Hi, Professor Kanter. I'm John Mosser with University Advancement here at Bentley, and it's a real honor to have you here today. I wonder if you would share just a few of your insights about how the concepts of SuperCorp might apply to higher ed.
Where better, you know? Where better than higher education? I mean, first of all, many institutions of higher education started modeling themselves after the worst aspects of business, not the best, you know, by becoming very financially oriented, et cetera. So it's by keeping purpose, the mission, alive. I mean, this is a university that does that. In fact, this is a university, talk about putting one foot in front of each other, that was a college recently and is now a university. So, you know, by continuing to execute on the mission, good things do happen. So I think the sense of purpose, clearly. I think there needs to be more room for, first of all, there needs to be more outreach to the world. I mean, I love the fact that Bentley is the model, if we ever get it off the ground, to do it other places, but Bentley's doing it for city partnership with City Year, Give a Year partnerships. But people have to get off campus, get into the world, but university is all about having people's minds stretched, and yet it's too easy to fall into orthodoxy in which people are trying to get people to look just like them and not to learn together. So we could do more co-learning. I believe that, well, that's why I like case method teaching at Harvard Business School. I mean, it never comes out the way I thought it would, because it's always determined by the voices and the experiences of people in the room. But on innovation, I think many institutions of higher education have forgotten how. My friend Warren Bennis, great scholar of leadership, was a university president for a while and wrote about it later and said the university is harder to change than a graveyard. You know, if you had your basic form laid down in the 14th century, and so, you know, there's another advantage Bentley has by being newer, by being technology-oriented, et cetera. There needs to be a lot more room for innovation, but that has to come from the passions of the faculty, who are the core of the knowledge development. Again, they can partner with others, and so more room for people to be seeding things that can help the university too. The problem with many universities is that people who work there don't care about the university, they care about their own profession or career. And so one of the jobs of the leaders of a university is that inspiring sense of purpose and the sense that the university is a vehicle for them to realize their dreams, not just a convenient paycheck while they pursue other things. So I do think these principles apply. And you know, the others as well. And I mean, they apply to hospitals. Here hospitals, supposedly saving lives, caring about health, don't spend enough time stepping back to think about their purpose, their contributions to the world, their coherence as a community that's collaborative, et cetera. So, you know, as usual, I think these are organizational principles, not just business principles. But we're in the U.S., we're kind of an aspirational society, and also if it comes from business, then it looks like it's really solid. But these are good organizational principles, and the leadership principles certainly apply.
I see a question here. Was there, Kyle, was there anyone else? Let's take this one to see, right here.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Evan Tellios. I'm an undergrad here.
Hi.
Hi. You mentioned some obviously influential companies, great CEOs, but given the recent disorder in the United States economy, where do you see our economic state maybe 10 years or 20 years? Do you see us following in their footsteps as a whole, or do you think we have a lot more catching up to do?
You mean the U.S.?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes is the answer. I mean, we could be like the companies that weren't sustainable. We already have fallen well behind in education. And we once used, I mean, that's higher education too. And some of it's for good reasons because other people have developed, but certainly in K through 12. But in higher education, for example, I've forgotten the exact statistics, but at one point the US produced something like 50% of all graduate degrees in the world. And now it's down to 22%, something like that, of those orders of magnitude. Don't quote me on the exact numbers. And some of that is really a good thing because other countries are developing. That's good for us. They can become our partners, our allies, our markets, etc. But we then have to work even harder to catch up. And my colleague, Bill Kirby, who's a professor of Chinese history, who is also now at Harvard Business School looking at Chinese history in the making, business cases, he said the other night in a seminar we were doing together, he said that in the time since Harvard broke ground on one project, and we know that we have some stalled projects there, 3 universities sprung up from scratch in China. I mean, we have to reinvest in every field in the things that were the foundation of greatness of our country. Luckily, we have one huge asset that if we don't fritter it away, and that is our people and the entrepreneurial spirit. And that entrepreneurial spirit also comes from a lot of people who have gone through all the trouble to migrate here. It comes from immigrants too. So, you know, that's our great hope, that we continue to invent because we just have determined individuals who won't stop. But we really have to reinvest. We have to reinvest in infrastructure. I mean, have you landed in the, well, I went to Seoul a lot because of Xinhan, but also to Beijing and other places. I mean, Asian airports in most places, not interestingly enough Mumbai yet, you're like in a palace to the future. Have you landed at JFK recently? I mean, Logan actually stacks up pretty well in some ways in the new terminals, but I mean, we're not investing. And, well, I don't want to, you know, go too far afield from what we're talking about here. I don't think we have to lose it. We have the potential. We are the greatest crossroads nation on earth. The Wall Street Journal yesterday had a front page article saying that investors, companies are already souring on China. Well, you know, it isn't only whether those countries, just because they're growing so fast, will take over, but they have not welcomed diversity the way we have. One of the reasons I believe that the U.S. emerged, you know, this is going to sound funny. I hope it does sound funny, actually, but it's true. Emerged from World War II so strong was not only because those other countries had to wait to rebuild and so forth, but why did English become the universal language of commerce? Why is American popular culture known all over the world, music and everything else? That's because when you're highly diverse, you also are very superficial. You know, English is very easy to speak badly and still be understood. Try getting a tone wrong in Mandarin. Try getting your accent wrong in French. Our culture, well, I mean, we have pockets of deepness, but they don't happen to exist on television. But yet, where was I in another country where they were saying, oh, I know, it was Australia. They say they only watch American TV. I mean, it's what that means really is, it's a kind of common denominator. Communities that are deteriorating, where crime is still high, if we have a third of all African American males in their 20s have a brush with the criminal justice system, then we are handicapping ourselves and our future. So, yes, we can do it, but we'd better make a lot of investments that we've been neglecting. Well, now there's a cheery note, right? Let's have one more question, and I can try to be really upbeat.
Okay, one more question then. I saw this hand first. I've got to be fair.
I'm Cynthia. I am a graduate student in the Human Factors program. And my question is geared towards technology and children. They're already using technology that was invented for adults, essentially, Google, email, and so on. I'm wondering if you see an opportunity there, an innovative opportunity to gear some technology towards children, or if it's kind of a done deal because they're using it anyway.
Oh yeah, well they are using it anyway. That's certainly true. Of course there is. There's enormous opportunities. And by the way, that's another strength of America, but which is the young teach the old. That's always, Margaret Mead once said we were the first culture in which the young taught the old. Because, immigrants came here, the kids learned English before the parents did, they teach the parents. But other places too, the kids get things ahead of their parents. I think children are, first of all, we can do things for children, make things for children. We don't have to lose control of these things because kids take them and use them as they will. Of course they will. But I think there's enormous opportunities with technology. I believe we will never replace face-to-face interaction, so we have to make sure that we don't let technology overwhelm every part of life. But sure, who knows what it'll be. I mean, Nokia, now I realize Nokia has been another company that slipped a little recently, but at one point, I mean, the CEO of Nokia spent his favorite focus groups were with 12 and 13-year-olds, and that already was seeming a little old in that field. I mean, we have to do more things that integrate children and adults in our society. We have to listen to children. Children often have values and wise things to say. Technology can be an incredible asset. Technology in health, and I'm not talking about electronic medical records, I'm talking about diagnoses and monitoring, and technology to encourage people to be walking, technology to help people connect, and there will always be kids who do silly things. We have to make sure that the silly things don't haunt them the rest of their lives, because, when my generation did silly things, it wasn't a permanent archive on a hard disk. So there's a lot of things to think about, but I think that is a very promising area for the future, and it can enhance learning. I mean, IBM's Reinventing Education projects it's not computers in the classroom at all. It's many ways that technology can give teachers access to wider resources. But there is a school that a group of people that work in the Harvard program, are in my Harvard program, we went and visited on a mountaintop in rural Brazil, where those really poor rural kids, through technology, through interactive games, were learning an incredible amount. And in fact, the real dilemma there, again, was their parents were puzzled and kind of against it because their parents were left out. So everything we do for children, we have to do for parents too. We can't have this. I worked in a school in Union City, New Jersey that was one of the first to really make technology the center of a middle school, and they set up a parent university. Now there are a lot of these where the kids taught the parents on weekends or after school. So again, we have to bring the generations together so that technology doesn't become a dividing line, but is something that we move forward on together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kanter, for sharing your insights with us. And let me remind you again of the reception in the Dandies room on the 3rd floor. I hope to see you there. And with Professor Kanter, you'll have an opportunity to say hello. See you on the 3rd floor.